Okay, hi everyone. Nice to see you guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Gabi.
Hello.
Good. Okay, thanks everyone. Hope you guys had a nice little chat with someone in your breakout session. I did, so that was lovely. And I want to introduce now for our fireside chat, we have Smartling's Gabi Moore, who is going to be facilitating the conversation, and Michael Levot and Paul Buckley from Canva, who are kind enough to join us. Paul is the localization product lead, and Michael is the localization program lead. So they have a lot of insights to share today. So just wanted to introduce you all, and thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabi. Thanks again so much, Michael and Paul, for joining us. I know that Canva has a super interesting localization program and story, as well as an upcoming mission. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Canva's localization program to date.
Yeah, Paul, I might jump in and then hand it over to you. Yeah, so the mission here at Canva has always been the same since long before Paul and I joined. The mission for localization, that is, and that's been to make Canva as accessible as possible to everyone across the world. And that's shared with other parts of the company too. So localization wants to make Canva accessible in different languages. Other parts of the company are trying to make Canva accessible to people with various forms of disabilities. Other parts of the company are trying to make Canva accessible on different devices. So that's kind of a unifying mission across the company, and we form a pretty large part of that. Beyond that mission, the objective is pretty simple. We want to give our global users the best experience we can possibly give them. And more recently, I think the buzzword, as it were, around this global experience has been hyperlocal or hyperlocalization. And for us, that kind of means handing over creative control to local teams in a scalable way. So making sure that we can create an experience that resonates in local markets without having to rebuild Canva 100 times. And I think that's kind of what we're pursuing right now and what we think is the next step for us. But that wouldn't really have been possible if we didn't do something fairly outlandish in our early history, and that is localizing extremely widely and extremely early. So Canva was founded in 2013, and by 2017, you could access Canva in over 130 languages, which is completely excessive. There's no real business case for having localized that early, but it's given us a great platform for localization going forward. We now have 30 million non-English speaking users and 12 markets where we can kind of reap the rewards of this economy of scale of handing over creative control to local teams in multiple markets all at once, and doing that really efficiently. Paul, I remember you having really interesting views about missions and plans, and then strategies and how they converge.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, as Michael said, like we've got a big plan. We've done a lot of planning. I think it's the localization strategy that underpins our plans, which gets me most excited. At the speed that the product grows here at Canva, our plans are constantly changing. We're taking on the constant challenge of creating scalable localization solutions. One particular focus we've had over the past few years is to sit as close to product as possible. That's one of our sort of localization strategies, and that helps us build a product with the global scale baked in, rather than trying to sort of tack it on at the end of the process. What we've found is that it does save us a lot of time and resources later on in translation, and also gives Canva a more natural local user experience for anyone in the world, which is, as Michael said, one of our core missions. So yeah, I would say, making plans is great, but when things are moving so quickly, it's important, yeah, for us just to have a sort of core strategy to lean back on.
Awesome, super interesting. So how did you go from translating into, I think, honestly, it's something like 200 languages, to refining your plan and developing a localization strategy?
Yeah, it's not quite 200 yet. We'll get there, but not quite. Yeah, it's been a bit of a learning journey. So as I said, we kind of made this very early decision. We weren't around yet at Canva, but there was this very early decision to localize very widely. And it wasn't just localization. There were a lot of efforts across the company, things like local outreach, a lot of organic work, organic growth work with SEO, landing pages, and those sorts of things. And then it was very, very successful, and kind of gives some platform, because when you're trying to create a strategy, you're not if you're not entering markets sequentially, if you're kind of doing it parallel, you can wait and see what's successful and where it's successful, and then you can really iterate in those markets, focus in on where you are successful, and then apply those learnings to other markets. So that's kind of what we've done. We were extremely successful in Latin America in particular early on, and continue to be now. So Mexico and Brazil are two of our biggest markets. Brazil, biggest market. I think it's pipped the US now as having the most users for Canva. And we're looking at what went so well in those markets and how we can apply it elsewhere. And I think the biggest learning has been that there was just such an awesome brand fit, like almost accidentally. I don't want to say accidentally because there were people working on this. And I don't want
Definitely not accidental, Michael. Everything was intentional.
Everything was 100% intentional. But there was kind of just this beautiful confluence of the brand that we had formulated over here in Australia and what was in the zeitgeist over in Latin America at the time. So from that, we're now trying to apply that to the other markets that we want to see at that same level as in Latin America.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Michael said there. I think in terms of how we came to that strategy, Gabi, I think a lot of this was born out of the sort of craziness of the scale at which Canva approached. I think having to go through that and suddenly take on all those new users and that responsibility, especially while the product's growing, kind of forces us to be able to step back and think, you know, how are we going to achieve this? How are we going to make this possible? And what are the sort of fundamentals that are going to drive this?
Excellent. So Michael, of the learnings that you've taken away from the huge success in Latin America, are there ones that were more easily applicable to other markets and maybe some that you tried applying and then didn't really go over so well in others?
Yeah, I think the more difficult ones have been really extremely culture and language specific. So there was as I said, there was this really nice matchup of how we viewed design and how design fits into people's lives, and also the kind of people who we assumed were using our product. Those were the people who were using it in Brazil in particular and the rest of Latin America. They were marketers, they were creatives, they viewed design as something very personal. And then I think when we shifted our focus to Europe, there's quite a different perception of what design means to people over there. I don't want to generalize too much, but what we found was that the same branding perhaps didn't resonate quite as well. And design is seen more as a technical expertise, as a kind of art that people apply. And those things where, I mean, this is exactly what the advantage that we feel that we have now, that you can kind of find a way of applying these very unique needs, or addressing these very unique needs of different markets in a scalable way. So that, for example, at the moment, we're looking at experimentation, where we hand over control of a particular part of the product to a local team and say, hey, what look if you were designing it from the ground up? And we've kind of created a framework so you can do that very quickly and with very little engineering effort involved, and see what works and see what people like and go from there. So I think rather than really applying learnings from Brazil or Latin America to other markets, it's appreciating that you need a way to be able to be flexible enough to capture those different subtleties of different markets.
Excellent. And Paul, from the product perspective, have you found that people in different regions interact with Canvas tools differently?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I was going to say off the back of what Michael said, a lot of this sort of localization process is very much just a sort of product management fundamentals in terms of understanding the user, really representing the user, and building the product for the user. So it's almost doesn't even feel at times like it's the job of localization, because really, as a product, we should be building it for everyone. So yeah, I think particularly with engagement with content, we have built several different user stories based off profiles around the world, and I think we do really need to. Well, a big goal for Canva is to be coming up with a content library that's reflective of the people that are using Canva. So that would be one area, yeah, that we really need to focus particularly on market-specific needs and trends.
Awesome, super interesting. I am seeing some questions come through the chat, so I'll ask them to you. To go all the way back to maybe a company that's in the growth stage, just at the beginning of the localization journey, when's the right time to think about localization? And coming from a company that's so mature in your localization process, what are some things that you wish you had known at the beginning?
Ooh, great question.
I want to jump in and say something before Michael says something even wiser, but I think the right time to think about it is at the very start. I think it needs to be something that's at the forefront, whether or not it's acted on or whether or not a strategy is implemented straight away. I think one of the biggest problems or issues that arises is thinking about it too late and not being prepared for it. I think making up for a lack of scale is something that takes a lot of resources, takes a lot of time and money to work backwards and fix things than it does to build a scalable solution up front. So I think, and again, similar to my comment about product, sort of fundamental product design should be thinking about something that strikes the heart of users. It's not necessarily market specific. And I think with Canva, definitely the vision for Canva has been, meeting a need that many people around the world have, and that's sort of one of the secrets to being able to take that to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a single answer to when you should start thinking about localization, but I can definitely say that we benefited enormously from doing it very early. So 3 years into Canva's journey, there were serious thoughts about localization. I think the benefits of doing it that early were multiple. One was retrofitting a localization pipeline to a product. We were building that pipeline. When I talk about a localization pipeline, I mean automation around Smartling largely. So it's a nice tie-in. But we built that automation very, very early. And now that it's in place, we have really, really good development velocity. So we're able to commit new code to our product very, very quickly without being blocked by localization. I think that's probably one of the biggest resistance points for other organizations when they were trying to retrofit localization into a development cycle. Oh, it's going to slow everything down. Well, once it's already in place, you kind of, the automation is there, and you can justify the very small amount of slowdown. And the other, I just reiterate a point I made earlier, that if you do localize very, very early, you can, this is a horrible analogy, but you're throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. You have all of that you have users from all over the world coming to your product, and you can see where the success is. I don't know why I called our user stuff we're throwing at all, but we saw where there was that sort of just perfect pre-existing confluence of what user and what we have to provide, and you don't have to go out and search for that because it's coming to you very early, and you can choose where the right regions and markets to prioritize are.
Definitely. And to that point, what kind of evaluation metrics does Canva use to see what is sticking to the wall and what's not sticking to the wall?
Evaluation metrics, I mean, I think there's no one metric that's going to be a silver bullet for these things, but kind of similar to what Michael said, experimentation is key. I think at Canva that's been a privilege that we've had, is to have a really good experimentation framework and lots of data resources that we can lean on in order to understand that. The other thing, based off what Michael said, was going into a market means actually having, obviously it means having more users. Having more users means being able to get more significant results. So being able to test on other segments is actually quite useful for experimentation. When you just do a one big aggregate, you might get some trends, but what we've found is that when we break out and aggregate by country, we do find very interesting results, and it does impact our strategy going forward. That's something that is much harder to achieve when, let's say, your sample size is 100, Portuguese, Brazilian users. You're not going to get many significant results, if any.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, we look at, as Paul said, a number of metrics. I think a lot of them are the typical ones that people look at. Things like retention, how many users are coming back to the product after each month, how many users are using activation, sort of using our product right through the full process, and just how many users are arriving at the product. I mean, we look at all of those things, and we also look at some more specific parts of the funnel as well. But I think retention for localization is the key figure. If people come back to your product, then it shows that they love it. I think we try to strike a balance between these data-driven initiatives of saying, yes, these are the metrics we're trying to move, and also just intuition of what a better experience for the users are. And not just your intuition, but also the intuition of people in those markets who understand the culture and who understand the language. There are often problems of optimization where you get the best retention result, but maybe you're not building the best product. And I think we try and strike a balance between those two objectives.
Yeah. Just to go off the back of that as well, I think, I mean, you mentioned some other metrics, Michael. I think engagement is a term we throw around a lot, which is quite ambiguous, but depending on the product, how much or how well is the user engaging with the product itself and also with the content. So as I mentioned before, content is quite a key part of Canva, and I think engagement with content is something that we track closely. And what was I going to say about engage? We do use engagement as a heuristic for that sort of optimal user flow. But as Michael said, there are times where, let's say you run an experiment and everything's neutral, everything's flat, and you think, well, is there something worth doing? But you might see, for example, the number of bugs reported or feedback has dropped significantly. And so you would see that as a sort of indicator of, well, the user experience is likely improved if people are leaving less critical feedback, even if we aren't necessarily improving activation or retention or engagement, quote unquote engagement. I think, as Michael said, there's a hidden metric in there where we really just want users to be enjoying their experience, and particularly with Canva, to be meeting more of their jobs to be done in terms of the design needs.
Yeah, definitely. I think another question that Gautam asked fits really nicely into that. As you're running all of these experiments and localizing into different markets, how do you ensure your brand voice remains consistent across all of those markets and that Canva feels the same at its core to the end user?
Yeah, I think there are a few possible ways to answer that. It's a really good question. I think the best way to answer it is with hiring and with company values. Like if everyone working towards these goals and working on marketing has that same culture and has those same values, then you're not going to depart too far from that core philosophy. Another way of answering it is that you build it into the process, and you make sure that even while you're allowing for these customizations, that there's good communication between brand marketing teams and these local teams. It's very difficult to do because the number of people does multiply. It's the one thing that you can't really escape the scaling problem for. You know, with engineering, you can do clever things, but localization is just intrinsically a people challenge, and you always end up relying on human intelligence and human empathy, and you just need to get more and more people as you scale up. So it's a real challenge, and I'm not sure that we've actually mastered this, but I think the best way to do it is just make sure that the people that you're bringing into your team share those core philosophies, and then you don't have to think about it too much. You don't have to worry about it at every point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think by no means have we mastered it, and I think there's plenty of room to grow, and we'd love to hear other ways that people are doing this. But I do think as separate from the sort of functional metrics we talked about earlier with engagement and activation and things, brand is, as Michael said, it's really more about the voice and how people are perceiving the brand itself, not about the functionality of the product. And I think, I mean, just coming back to some more core localization principles, things like style guides and really clear expectations of tone and context help a lot. You know, we have a great translator community that's contributing to Canva and helping us take Canva to the globe. And one way that we can make sure that that brand, especially that brand tone, is coming through clearly is to have really clear, well thought out style guides, and to be sure that in whatever language, in whatever market, we're speaking the same. Well, I shouldn't say speaking the same language. I mean that metaphorically. We're speaking the same language, regardless of what language we're speaking.
Totally. And, you know, to that end, when you're translating into so many languages at the same time, it is kind of hard to keep an eye on all of these, especially, you know, I don't know that any human can possibly speak so many languages. So have you ever had a time where a locale maybe wasn't exactly hitting the right notes with regards to the brand voice, and what did you do to reel it back in?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes. We were a team of 6 people, and as I said, at points we've been in more than 130 languages. Those 6 people did not speak 130 languages, and some of the languages they're not easily adapted to a internet environment, and you do get some very strange things. I remember once, this is some of our dirty laundry, but I remember there was a on our homepage in Hebrew that was meant to say design anything, but the feedback we got was that it was ambiguous between that and sadness everywhere, which was not the message we were trying to get across. And I think this is something that we're working on right now. For example, one thing that we're trying to do is upload visual context for every string to Smartling before those strings are seen. So people will kind of get the full HTML context of a string when they see it, and hopefully they'll be able to make intelligent decisions, where it's all about giving those translators the chance to use their skill in the right way to get the right result. So I think we're well on our way to having identified the issues that cause those errors or unfortunate circumstances, and we're giving translators the best possible chance to get the point across.
Yeah, that makes me so happy to hear that so much consideration goes into the style guide and glossary. We always evangelize that as a place that you need to start far before a translation begins. So definitely like to hear that be reinforced. There's one final question from the audience that I'll ask you, and then I think it'll probably be time to wrap up. But if there are any other last minute questions, please do drop them in there. But how do you go about prioritizing the different languages and regions? For example, maybe deciding between triaging Portuguese for Portugal or Portuguese Brazil?
Yeah, I might jump in.
Yeah, go for it, Michael.
I think the decision is made differently for different parts of the product. So maybe Paul can answer for the content parts of the answer for the kind of broader program of localization. So we make prioritization calls based on different factors. So for instance, one example might be our customer support. And we needed to find a solution that will work for all languages, all 130 something languages that we've been in. But then we needed to find a really good solution for our biggest languages. And as I've reiterated a few times through here, the huge advantage of being in a lot of markets all at once is that you have data and you can very easily project what things are going to look like a year from now and make decisions ahead of time. So for the example of customer support, we were able to look ahead and say, oh, okay, our Brazilian market is growing at more than 100% year on year. Even though we don't have that much feedback today, in 2 years, that's going to be a huge amount. So we started moving from a generic solution to that customer support to having people in that market solving that problem for us. So I think most of it is data driven. I think that's fair to say. In terms of prioritizing European Portuguese, easy decision for us. No offense to our Portuguese users, but we have 6 million users in Brazil, and English there's not a huge take up of English in Brazil. So we know that a lot of users won't be able to access our product if we don't localize it. So that's a huge priority for us. And yeah, a lot of resources go into making sure that our users in Brazil have the best experience they can have.
I'll just add something in very quickly. I know we haven't got much time. Yeah, I think prioritization in project management is always a confluence of factors. I think size is one that's really big for us. So, you know, we have a lot of users. It's going to be a lot more happy people if it's done or done better. But then there's also the severity of the consequences of not localizing. For example, in right to left locales, that's been a big priority for us in the last 18 months because we do have users in those locales, but they're not as big as our sort of top 10. But actually ensuring at least a minimal viable quality in those locales is important, and so we have prioritized them.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, both those are great points. Thank you so much for joining. I think we only have 15 seconds. I see it ticking down and I'm panicking, but luckily we have a meditation section coming up. So I'll be able to exhale and I'll meet everyone in there. Thanks so much again.
Thanks, Gabi. Thanks everyone.
Gabi. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.